Hello everyone and welcome to Lecture 3, Women and Leadership. Let's take a moment to read this African proverb. When you educate a man, you educate an individual. When you educate a woman, you educate a generation. I think that's so important and so valuable. You might not necessarily believe it, but it doesn't really matter. So many people around the world do. So I think that's fascinating. My next slide is just to say Happy Women's Day to all of you, but that's being the 9th of August. The quote here is, "Every man needs a woman when his life is a mess, because just like the game of chess, the queen protects the king." I think that's a lovely quote. But I particularly enjoy this image of the woman here with a very strong manly arm. Okay, Happy Women's Day, everyone. Important information for us to know. First thing is that it's essential that you do the prescribed reading from Anderson and the Word document, especially for next week. There's going to be a Word document on Moodle. It's not loaded yet, but hopefully will be by the end of the week. That is important, as well as the Anderson reading for next week, because there may be a little surprise in the form of a class test for bonus marks. Okay, it's just going to be a small class test, but nevertheless there will be one. It won't be on Klutze and de Koning, although it's important that you do read that as well, so that you have an understanding of where we're going with class next week. But in order to be able to complete the class test, you must read Anderson and the Word document that will be loaded on Moodle before the end of the week. Next important point is that the quiz is still running this week. It closes on Friday night. It's very important that you complete the quiz this week because it will not be open after this week. It can't be reopened, so you must finish it before Friday night. If you want to already know what you need to do to prepare for the quiz, then read the readings for week 2. That's Anderson and Klutze and de Koning. It's an open book quiz, so you can take the sources with you when you do the quiz. And also please look at my class slides from week 2, because some of the images are there and included in the quiz. I also hope that you've all selected your policy for the policy analysis, because it is due in September, and although it's only August now, the time will whiz by, so already select your policy. It's also very important that you guys come to me with the white paper that you've chosen if you choose to do your own one from a different country, because I need to see what that policy looks like. And then if you've picked the one from one of the topics I've given, I'd like to see which white paper you're actually looking at. Okay, so please, I actually need to see every single one of you with regard to your policy analysis. Then, we will be doing a policy simulation of sorts in the form of scenario building. That will be due in week 10, but I'll talk to you more about that soon, probably in class next week, as we go forward with the idea of what it's all about. Just make a note in your diary basically about this. You don't want to be sick that week, okay? Also important, before you watch the rest of this lecture, please open up the unit's Moodle site, okay, under week 3, because there's an activity you'll need to complete while you're looking at this lecture, this recorded lecture as well. It's very important that you do that now, because otherwise you'll miss out on this exercise, and I want you all to be able to do it. So I'll just give you guys a moment to do that. Okay. These are the sources listed under week 3. Now, I'm not going to be covering these sources in the class today. I'm looking at other perspectives of women in leadership. But these sources do provide you with some different perspectives from around the world around women and leadership issues and policy-making issues. For example, this first one about what Kenya can teach the US about menstrual pads is a very interesting article. There's also one about gender sensitivities in sub-Saharan Africa, and that the case for why you would need gender-sensitive policies in sub-Saharan Africa. It's all very interesting, okay? So it won't be tested and it's not an exam, so I don't expect you all to learn everything that's in here, but I do hope that you read at least a few of these, because as I said before, they do offer different perspectives, and I think it might open your mind to some stuff that you might not have known before. Okay, so please take a moment to just pick at least 2 or 3 of these and have a quick read through them. They are on Moodle under week 3. This next point is also important. This is happening tomorrow night. It's organized by the SRC. It's for Women's Week and Women's Month, basically. But there's 2 documentaries going to be running tomorrow night from 6 to 8 in Lecture Theatre 8. There'll be free snacks provided by the SRC. The first documentary is called A Ritual of Agony, and the second one is called The Land of No Man. If you're interested in women's issues in Africa especially, please come and watch these documentaries tomorrow night at 6. Now, let's do a quick exercise. These symbols on the side here, presumably you'll understand what these are. It's quite stereotypical, but you've got the male symbol, which is blue, and you've got the female symbol, which is pink. Some people might argue that that's unfair, you know, some women like blue, but whatever. The point is we have to move forward in life, right? So let's just accept at the moment that we're not going to argue this point, that these are the symbols that everyone understands by men and women, and we'll just move forward with it in that way. Now, this is interesting. Now, I'm going to give you a list of occupations, and I want you guys to think in your head immediately what would come up in your mind first, female or male. First one, construction worker. What do you think of immediately? For me, to be honest, I would think male first, although I do know women who are strong enough to be construction workers. But I would think typically this would be a male occupation. I suppose that's unfair to say, but we all have built-in biases, and I suppose there's stereotypical stuff going on there. I can already hear Alba saying something in the background, I'm sure. Okay, I'm sure Sven would have something to say. Perhaps Andrea as well would have something to say. I'm sure Rebecca would too. I'm sure all of you guys would. Kashelia, I'm sure must have something to say about the idea of men and women and their roles in society. But flight attendant, do you think that's typically a woman or a man? I see more and more male flight attendants, so I think that's interesting. Social worker, I myself would be probably more prone to say a woman, but I do know men social workers, so I suppose there isn't really a taboo on that, and I suppose more and more men are becoming social workers. Secretary and primary school teacher, I would be inclined to say woman from my past experience and understanding of that occupation, because the most secretaries and the most primary school teachers I know are women. But that's not to say that a man could not be in those positions, obviously. So it's just something for you to think about as well. Hairstylist, I'd say is a fair split between men and women. Veterinarian, again, a fair split between men and women, I think. Physical education teacher, I think that depends on the school that you're in. If you're in an all-girls school, I suppose you could have a male physical education teacher, but you probably would have more likely a female physical education teacher. That depends. Chef, woman or man, I think. Photographer, woman or man, I think. Nurse, traditionally in my mind, I think of a woman when I think of a nurse, but there are many male nurses, so actually that is quite a stereotypical thing to think. Same goes for computer analyst, because in my mind, I would leap to male. I don't know what you guys all think, but just generally, when I think of a computer analyst, I want to go towards the idea of a male occupying that position or role in society, which is complete nonsense, obviously, since we have so many girls at the moment doing IT. Interesting. Machinist? I think that would depend on what kind of machinist. Since a machinist is a person who operates machinery, and that could be from a range of different occupations and different related machines, so I don't know, it could be male or woman. Vicar, that's an interesting one, don't you think? That also depends, I think, strongly on your religious convictions, but women weren't allowed to be vicars for a very long time, so being a vicar, relatively speaking, is quite a new, if you're a woman, is quite a new occupation for a woman. I know that in some religious communities a woman could not be the head of a church, so that's something interesting, depending how strongly you feel. Dental assistant, artist, that could be either or. News reporter, either or. Telephone operator, either or. Astronaut, either or. Pharmacist, I think either or. Babysitter, more and more men, I would think. You also get a lot of stay-at-home husbands these days, so I think that dynamic is changing, and that point in society where you expect a woman to always be at home, sort of barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, is no longer the norm. Various reasons why, globalization, issues, and various global issues being brought to the fore, and the fact that everything is so instant now, and that we have this instant communication, people learn more quickly about different perspectives. So I think the idea, that challenged idea, that is very challenged, that idea about women being the ones who have to stay at home. Now you get a lot of women out there who are the breadwinners, and the men stay at home and take care of the kids. So, newspaper editor, man or woman? Although typically, generally in the media, you'd find more men as newspaper editors, but that's not because women can't do it. It's because of a built-in bias against the woman's ability. So there are very few women editors out there, actually. Cashier? Mechanical engineer? A cashier, I don't know. I've seen a lot of men and women as cashiers in South Africa, so that depends where you come from. You might have your own point of view on that one. But mechanical engineer, I think, is an interesting one as well. Because mechanical engineers are normally traditionally seen as men, which is completely wrong, obviously. You know, you can be a woman and be a mechanical engineer. The word policeman is inherently biased because of the word itself. It's policeman. And you call these people policemen, and you can be a policewoman. So I think perhaps we should call them police, just the police generally, or police persons, or police people. Maybe. Plumber? I don't know. I've never seen a woman plumber before, but that's not to say that a woman can't do plumbing. If you know a woman plumber, you should let us know in the discussion forum. That would be interesting. Librarian? I've seen men and women librarians. Same with bank tellers. And dietitians, I think that's men and women. So no single gender can occupy that market, I think, that it can be male or female. All right, let's continue with our next exercise. Here we have an image of a female. Well, we presume that it is because the symbol is a woman wearing a dress, and it's pink, so it must be a woman. And then blue, that would be the man. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put on the screen a couple of ministerial positions or portfolios that men and women traditionally occupy. in governments around the world. And I want you to think of the first thing that comes to mind. So if I put up the first one, let's do as an example, the environment, for example. What do you think? Do you think that a woman should typically be in that portfolio? I mean, obviously we'd hope it's the best person for the job, but just in terms of what you think would be best, do you think it would be best for a woman to be in that ministerial position, to have that portfolio of the environment, dealing with issues around climate change, for example? I mean, 3 of you guys mentioned climate-related women leaders yesterday in our tutorial with Wangari Maathai. So I think that's an important point to consider, is do women care more about the environment in that way? Is it an innate thing? Is it something that's inherent within women that might not be so much in men? I mean, I don't know. That's for you to decide, but it's at least think about. Okay, energy portfolio. Do you think that's something typically more women-related or more men-related? Do you think that a woman could do that position or hold that position properly or have enough gravitas in that position? Social work, what do you think about that one? A lot of people think that women should be in social work because they gravitate more towards the idea of nurturing, caring, family role. But that in itself is stereotypical. We just spoke about the idea that men are more and more becoming stay-at-home husbands. They're the ones taking care of their kids and doing nappy changes, etc. So that's actually quite a silly thing to say. I think that a man could also occupy that role. Health, is it man, is it woman? I don't know. I think either or. This is an interesting one. When you say Minister of Finance in your mind, do you think woman or man? I mean, really think about that. I don't know many women who might have occupied a position of Minister of Finance anyway, but you did mention yesterday, a couple of you guys, about the IMF leader and Christine Lagarde, and somebody else mentioned Maria Ramos and her position and role in terms of finance. So it's not like it's unheard of, but it's not as typical as men occupying that role as Minister of Finance. If we look at policy making in relation to defense, what do you think? Do you think that should be a man's occupation or a woman's occupation? I think myself that it depends on how strong the woman is and determined to avoid war, be more proactive towards peaceful resolution, conflict negotiation, all those kinds of positive conclusions to conflict or avoidance of war, as opposed to the idea of going out there and attacking and destroying and whatever in the name of democracy or whatever it might be. Okay, so I think it depends on what you think. Traditionally, we spoke yesterday about this role of man and how man is a protector or the defender of the people kind of thing. So I think it depends on what you view this as. Science and technology. You think that should be a woman thing or a man thing? Just think about that. I mean, I think you might be surprised by what you confront in yourself about these kinds of things. Sport and recreation, you think that's more like a man's ministerial portfolio? You think a man should deal with that? I don't know. Agriculture? Do you think, when you think of a farmer, do you think of a man or do you think of a woman? Traditionally. I think we should ask ourselves these questions. Especially in South Africa, when there's so much discussion around land reform issues, we have to ask ourselves, how many women are farmers? Okay, how many women are successful farmers? Tourism. Should that be a portfolio held by a woman or a man? And should it make any difference? It's just something to think about. So, because I think that we go through life, we don't really question these ministerial portfolios or the positions that people hold. We don't ask ourselves what our biases are inherently. And I think we should confront ourselves because, I mean, how else will we move forward? Remember, we always go back to the points in policy making of how to improve the human condition. We can't improve the human condition and improve people's lives if we ourselves are afraid to confront what might be prejudice or bias within ourselves. We have to. I suppose it's the only way to move forward. Okay, let's look at this next slide. What do all of these have in common? Okay, now I'm going to let you guys think about this. I can already see you thinking what they could be. Some of you are probably Googling these things as I speak. But I'll give you a minute or two to think about that. What is the first image? What is the second image? And what is the third image? And what do they all have in common? Now, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. It is related to women and leadership. That's my hint. Okay, so the first one, if you've thought by now, that is the Rwandan flag, and it's the outline of the country of Rwanda. The second one is obviously a flag. Do you know what it is? It's the Bolivian flag from Bolivia. And then the third image is a picture of a city in Cuba. There's the Cuban flag as well. Actually looks quite romantic. So we've got Rwanda, Bolivia, and Cuba. Now, I've also put them in that specific order on purpose, so think about how that might relate to each other. Okay, I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to think about it, and then I'll let you know. Okay. These three countries, Rwanda, Bolivia, and Cuba, in that order, are the top 3 countries around the world that have the most women parliamentarians. Okay, Rwanda has around just over 60% are made up of women in its parliaments. Bolivia has just in the sort of low 50 percentages, and then Cuba is around 49%. So those are the top 3 countries in the world with the most women in parliament. Interesting to think about. Now, let's look a little bit about the background info from UN Women. They've got some quite recent data here, so I find this very interesting. The first one is, listen to this, only 22.8% of all national parliamentarians were women as of June 2016, last year. So it's a slow increase from 11.3% in 1995. I mean, it is an increase. So from 1995, that's still quite a long time ago, but even then, it's only 22% now. So I think that we should be moving quicker, and we're not. You have all of these women platforms, women-related platforms internationally, like CEDAW and the Beijing Platform of Action in 1995, and all these countries who are signatories to these different platforms and these different protocols suggest that they will have a 50-50 quota by a certain time. That was 2015. It came and went, and countries did not have a 50-50 quota, and by the looks of things here, we're not moving as quickly as we should. As of January 2017, 10 women are serving as head of state and 9 are serving as head of government. That's interesting. Now, for those of you who might not know the difference, I think we covered this perhaps in first year, but head of state would be like the president of the country. Okay, so like it could be a president, but it also could be a queen. Like in England, Queen Elizabeth, she is the head of state of that country. But you also have countries where you have heads of state and you have prime ministers who are heads of government. And the prime ministers are the ones who actually make the policy. The head of state is pretty much the rubber stamper. In other words, they're there to just stamp these things into law, but they don't have much input in that way. It depends on how involved you want to be, I guess, as the head of state. But you don't have the full power that the prime minister as head of government would have. Nevertheless, you still have 10 women serving as head of state and 9 serving as head of government as of January 2017. I just mentioned about Rwanda having the highest number of women parliamentarians worldwide. It has around 63.8% of seats in the lower house. Globally, there are 38 states in which women account for less than 10% of parliamentarians in single lower houses, including 4 chambers with no women at all. Now that I thought was quite a surprising finding. Now here, look at this. This is quite a chunky paragraph to look at or navigate, but try and navigate it, just look at it carefully. This is looking at the variations remaining in the average percentages of women parliamentarians in each region. So what it does is it looks at, for example, as of June 2017, we're looking at single, lower and upper houses, so we're looking across parliament here, across all the tiers of parliament. In the Nordic regions, or Nordic countries, you've got 41.7% women parliamentarians. Americas, 28%. Europe, including the Nordic countries, 26%. I can't believe they have to include the Nordic countries there as well to push up their percentage. Europe, excluding the Nordic countries, 25%. Sub-Saharan Africa, 23%. We're not really representing people. We have to do better. Asia, 19%. Arab states, 17%. And the Pacific, 17%. So we're doing better than Asia and the Arab states. That I understand because of traditionally this idea of sort of a general stance because of religion about women in the Arab states and what the woman's role is. So I kind of get where that's coming from. But I think that a lot of these regions can do better and should do better. Let's look at our next point. As of January this year, only 18% of government ministers were women. That's around the world. 18%. Can you believe that? That's very, very low. The most commonly held portfolio by women ministers is the environment, natural resources, energy, interesting, and followed by social sectors such as social affairs, education, and the family. That makes sense as well. The global portion of women elected to local government is currently unknown. This is interesting. Why has nobody done a study on this? Why don't we know how many women there are at local level? Perhaps one of you guys already thinking about doing honours in the future can maybe make that your research topic. Now here is a very interesting thing. They've given 2 examples as well. Women's representation in local governments can make a difference. How do we know? Here's some examples. Research on Panchayats, these are local councils in India, discovered that the number of drinking water projects in areas with women-led councils was 62% higher than those with men-led councils. Now, 62% higher is quite a lot. It's quite a high percentage. So that means that you'd have more women involved or more projects getting off the ground in women-led councils. Interesting. In Norway, in another example, there's a direct causal relationship between the presence of women in municipal councils and childcare coverage. That's interesting. But now, although this might be the case, we have to ask ourselves this point. That's good, but it doesn't say much about the quality or the substance of these projects. This is a point that we will come back to when we're talking about policy making and the policy process later on, is this idea of bean counting. So it's great to say how many things women might have achieved, but what is the substance, or how valuable is that thing in fact? I mean, what is the substance like? Is there quality? Does it deserve to have that label attached to it? We'll talk about these later on when we do more around policy making. Okay. Next. There's established and growing evidence that women's leadership in political decision-making processes improves them. There's more and more evidence every day. I mean, you can just Google the idea of women in leadership and you'll find so many articles around, especially interestingly in India, which I think is a very interesting dynamic actually. But women being in charge of projects and policy and what that contributes to the growth of society in general. Also, women demonstrate political leadership by working across party lines through parliamentary women's caucuses. That's interesting. It says, even in the most politically combative environments, remember we spoke about this idea of women having a natural inclination towards conflict resolution and peace building. Now again, we're talking about something quite generic and quite wide-ranging here. I mean, we're not talking about specifics. But generally, the idea is that women might be more inclined towards peace building and a proactive peace building process as opposed to violence first. They also champion issues of gender equality, such as the elimination of gender-based violence, parental leave and childcare, pensions, gender equality laws, and electoral reform. All right. This brings us to sort of the main portion of today's lecture, which is the case study exercise. There's a video that's on Moodle it's called Women in Policy Making, One Leader's Perspective, and it looks at a speech presented by President Atifete Yayaga, who was president of Kosovo from 2011 to 2016. This is a picture of her here at the bottom of the slide. So I've got a link here, but there's also a hard copy of the speech that's loaded on Moodle that you can also link to there, or you can just see the activity where the video is showing there as well. So please watch the video. And then you have to do the quiz that's linked to it. There are about 7 or 8 questions. It's not going to be really for marks or anything, but I want to see the whole point is that if you can really watch something and gather information from that thing that you're watching. It's also a very interesting speech. So it's about 30 minutes. Please watch it all the way through. She's a very important, powerful speaker. And because she's from the Kosovo region, she speaks a lot about issues around rape survival in Kosovo from after the war there, and women, and how they find a voice. And how she has allowed them to find a voice, which I think is really fascinating. So please have a look at that video and then do the activity that links to it. Now, you need a password to access the quiz. The password is the word limit, as in the sky is the limit. Okay, so the password is limit, L-I-M-I-T. All right, you need that password to activate the quiz to be able to do that activity. Okay. Right. Okay, welcome back. I assume at this point that you've watched the 30-minute video and that you've undertaken the quiz, which is open on Moodle. It's about, you get 15 minutes to do the quiz. You only get to do it once. And hopefully you've been able to get a lot from what she had to say. Not only what she had to say, but really the way that she said it, her poise as a woman leader, and how she was received by the audience in that speech. So hopefully you found that interesting. Okay, that's where we'll leave it for today. The TUT preparation for week 4 is as follows. There is no preparation for week 4's TUT. Yay! Okay, so all you have to do is come to the tutorial next week Tuesday, because we'll do some exercises in class. But what you do need to do, remember, is prepare for week 4's lecture, because there'll be a mini class test, a surprise class test in that lecture. Okay, so that will be for marks, the little class test. So please make sure that you do come to class and that you do read those readings in time so that you're prepared. Okay, but otherwise, I want to say one more time, Happy Women's Day again, and good luck with everything else you have to do this week. I guess I'll see you all next week, Tuesday. Bye, everyone.